So is anybody baking any Christmas cookies yet or what? My friends want to have a cookie exchange and it's December 12th. So I'm gonna have to bake some cookies.
Who's doing the third slide? I think it says Sally, just FYI.
I can do, I'll do the first. I'll do the land acknowledgement and the welcome.
And then what's the third slide? I don't know. I thought I was facilitating that. I thought I was doing the remote control. Let me go to the third slide to see what it looks like.
Okay, so I think it is 3:45. You guys want to get started?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for planning and the new math curriculum, the junior edition. We're going to speak specifically today about junior. But before we get started, we would like to do the territorial acknowledgement, please. Kate, if you don't mind, or Sally, sorry, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
We acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered is part of the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations. These indigenous nations, known as the Anishinaabeg and Lenape, agreed through their ancestral languages to the mutual sharing of the land with obligations and responsibilities to the environment. Today, these responsibilities and obligations extend to all peoples.
Okay. So here today we have Alicia, Kate, and I. And then we're also joined by Heather Wark, who is becoming a familiar face in our board, and Derek McMahon, who teaches at Aberarder in grade 5-6. Thank you for joining both of you, and I'm looking forward to the next 45 minutes.
Okay, so let's get started. Today, this is our overview for today. We're gonna look at the new math curriculum, and we're gonna look at a specific curriculum expectation. We're gonna check out the key changes document and then some helpful tools to help you plan long-range plans. And of course, we're gonna talk about assessment and learning goals because that goes together. Okay, so Sally, can you take us to the new math curriculum website, please? Oh, you have it up already, good. Okay, so this is where you get to when you go to the new math curriculum. I know everyone's sort of familiar with this page. We're gonna first go to the specific expectation we're looking at, which is in grade 5. And the expectation we're looking at here is going to be in the numbers strand, and we're going to look at it on expectation by strand. Okay, and then we're going to, yep. And then we're going to click on specific expectation there. And then can you scroll down until you see the subheading, yeah, fractions, decimals, and percents. And we are going to look at B1.3, represent equivalent fractions from halves to twelfths, including improper fraction and mixed numbers using appropriate tools in various contexts. And B1.4, compare and order fractions from halves to twelfths, including improper fractions and mixed numbers in various contexts. And the reason we chose 2 is because they kind of go together here. It's really good to think about working with expectations in a cluster and not in isolation. And there is, if you've perused the new curriculum and even the old curriculum, there's lots of overlap, and we want to make our jobs easier and better. So it's good to cluster expectations here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to see if there's anything new in these 2 expectations compared to the old curriculum. So we're going to go back out of here to the main menu again.
So Kate, I just want to talk about one thing really quick. So we're specifically looking at an expectation because we're showing how one might go about like when you're teaching a strand or teaching expectations, but we're also like doing it so that we're becoming familiar with the platform, right? That's kind of the goal of the platform, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you want me to go back now?
Yeah, so we just chose this specific expectation. This is one that Derek and I worked on, so we kind of chose that, and it's grade 5, so it's right in the middle of junior, just as an example of how we might use the website to sort of guide our thinking. So if we go back to, yep, this page, and you click on the resource area,
And
you'll see here the key changes document that I think a lot of teachers were handed this in September. As a printable, and it is printable. And so this kind of allows you, if you scroll down, to compare the two curriculums
so
and
the
see what's
2005
different.
and the 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right off the hop there, they were not included at all, the social emotional learning in the last one.
Right, right. So there's lots of, there's some new strands, right, in the financial strand as well. But then you can also look at it under specific strands that we're familiar with, like number, which formerly was number sense enumeration. And we can look for the subheadings that are in the new curriculum. And the specific one we're looking at today is fractions, so it's right there.
Yeah.
And then in the old curriculum, this is what was expected of students in elementary school. And then you can compare that to the new curriculum and see what's there.
So like in grade 1, they're beginning to look at halves, but now they're recognizing the equivalent fractions
Right.
of half,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Although, because like, even though I think it says equivalent fractions, like we have to assume, and Derek and I were chatting about this before, that like the kids that he's teaching right now in grade 5 obviously didn't have this in grade 1, right? So this is something that you have to keep in mind when you're teaching for the next few years, that there's going to be some gaps in learning, and you'll have to go back to think about what they would have learned based on the old curriculum.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think too with the junior grades, there seems to be quite a bit of change within the junior grades. Maybe the primary is not as much. So just keeping that in mind when you are doing your planning and when you are, you know, introducing that these gaps are going to exist for a bit, and that it's okay to take a bit and, you know, fill in those gaps that the students are going to need to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at this one, Kate, the grade 4 here in the 20 to 2005, writing fractions with a standard fractional form. So the first time they're writing it with standard notation like that is in grade 4 previously. So thinking about the grade 5s now, last year would have been the first time. And if they didn't get that expectation taught because of the break from COVID, well, not a break, but because it was harder to meet all the expectations at the time as a new thing on a virtual platform, you would that those students may have had fractions last in grade 3 if it wasn't something that was through the whole year. So the grade 5 students this year may never have seen it in standard fractional form. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I know Derek can speak to that for sure. Later on, we'll get to his voices.
Okay.
Okay, so it's really good to use this document to sort of compare and think about what your kids might know or might have gaps in.
So new to grade 5, because we're looking at the grade 5 expectation today, is adding and subtracting fractions with like denominators. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So
That's
one
what we're
step further.
focusing on, but
No.
that's new for fractions.
Sure. And we could have added that into our cluster of expectation, but I think for today's, that might be a good next step. But for today's workshop, we're just sort of doing a small amount of work. So can we go back to the curriculum?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll go back to the grade, and this time we're going to look at it from a different view. We're going to look at it from the strand overview.
Okay.
Yeah. And in number there again. And this gives you a totally different perspective on the expectations. At the top, you'll see that it says an overall expectation, and this is something new for the math the math curriculum, it's being sort of aligned similar to the language curriculum that we have, where we have an overall expectation that crosses the grades. And then underneath this grid is how they have linked expectations together. So you can scroll down a little bit to find the fraction ones that we were honing in on. It was B, grade 5, B 1.3 and 1.4.
So grade 5, but right there's 1.3. So if we keep going, we'll find it. There we go.
One thing when we were looking at this is noticing that those numbers of the expectations, so B1.3 is not lined up straight across kind of in that linear fashion, which takes a little bit of getting used to. And I think we were going to chat about that a little bit and the purpose behind that.
Yeah. So, but first I want to ask Derek, like, is this a view that you find helpful as a classroom teacher to plan, or like how might you use this, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And you already kind of talked about how those expectations have changed from the 2005 to 2020. And so really what you'll want to do is pull that up and kind of highlight where those expectations that you're focusing on first, and then comparing them to what they were supposed to know in grade 3 and 4. I ended up backing the truck all the way up to grade 3 just because I know that with COVID and everything, the expectations might not have been covered in depth, but also that a lot of the concepts were new to begin with. So even just introducing vocabulary came from looking at what they were supposed to know for grade 3.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Derek.
Great, Derek, can you show us one more time your sheet that you were highlighting? Because I think that's interesting, and it was just really quick, so you might have to talk so
Sorry.
that.
Yeah. So I print this out, and we kind of talked about the overall expectation up on the top. So whenever you're planning a new unit or a new focus, you kind of want to have that page available, and then you're going to kind of highlight where you're going to start. So that's kind of how I started with fraction after completing a few diagnostic activities and understanding what they remembered and what they needed a refresher on.
Those diagnostics are so critical this year. Well, they're always critical, but they're even more critical this year, right?
For sure.
I like how you highlight, like you have, so instead of having to print out the whole curriculum, because I know it's frustrating for some people who like that paper copy, but this is a good overview to print off. So I like how you did that. That's a great idea.
And it's also helpful, I think, for junior grades who start to have kids who are perhaps modified and might need, you know, a different grade expectations that they're working towards anyway, or thinking about where they're going to next for that skill so that they can build on the depth of the questions that they're asking.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kate, because then if you're thinking about how it all connects, and then when you're teaching something, then it's going to be easier to like see how you can connect it in, right? I like that. That's a great.
Now, going back to what Alicia pointed out, is that if we look across at the row of this, it's like in grade 1, B 1.7, 1.7, 1.7, then grade 4, 1.4, and then 1.3, and then again 1.4 in grade 7, and there's nothing in grade 6 or 8. And we kind of were humming and hawing about that, and the rationale is that this is the skill that builds on each other, but the number system is actually that this is like the third expectation for grade 5 under numbers. So it doesn't necessarily mean that 1.3 matches with 1.3 across the grades. So this view is kind of nice because it's actually laid out. Remember in the old curriculum, you would like flip to your grade, pick an expectation, and there was no number. It was just a dash. And then you would flip to the next grade and sort of try and figure out which one matched. They've sort of done the work here for you. So that is kind of nice.
Yeah, that is really good. Okay. Do you want me to stop? Do you want me
yeah, we can go back to the curriculum now because we're going to look at a different view. We're going to go back to, we'll have to look on the left there where it says expectation by strand. You can click on that. We're going to go back to like the specific ones that we looked at. Yep. But this time we're actually going to go up and do the compare grades. So you have to click on the overall expectation at the top there, the blue tab,
There.
and then, yep. And then click where it says compare grades. So this is another view that they give you within that. It's similar to the last one we saw from grade 1 to 8, but just kind of shrinks it down into your grade and your before and after. The difference is that like I said, the number system isn't totally lined up here. So you just got to keep that in mind. But Derek, I don't know if you use this view, but it is something that's available. Is this something you've gone to before, or what do you think?
Yeah, this was kind of like a lifesaver even early on in September, because even anything in number sense, I was kind of comparing what the new benchmarks were, just for multiplication or working with numbers up to 100,000 or a million. I was just trying to see if there were any changes there. Which again, my grade 5s, they were grade 4s last year, they might not have had those same benchmarks.
That's so
So
true.
this is great for planning any unit, I think. It's a good place to start.
And it's easily accessible right from like the specific expectations. Sally, were you going to add something in here? I kind of cut you off there.
No, I just like how it's narrowed in, and so then you're really able to see, like, this is the chunk of what you're going to focus in on. However, that other view does really show the prior to the grade 3, like the grade 3 and the 2, so it's useful. But I like how it's narrowed in, and then you can kind of see all of the expectations that connect.
Well, and what's nice about this view too is that all the words that are underlined is a built-in glossary there. So if you click on something,
I'm trying there. Oh, I'm not waiting.
yeah, let's be patient. So then it pops up. So if you need a little bit more information on that, it's really nice. And actually, I found this to be very handy because there is some new vocab in the curriculum that I wasn't aware of. Like I had no idea what a Carroll diagram was in primary the other day. So that was very helpful.
Yeah, and I think just
It's
even
a Carroll diagram. No,
I'll tell you later.
Okay.
as just a little refresher, because sometimes we know that we think we know what they are. Just to kind of give you a quick little refresher that sometimes can help us move forward.
Exactly. So on that note, you can actually find this glossary back in the specific expectation where you were before. The words you'll see are underlined here, and I'm sure lots of you have clicked on that. But then underneath is the teacher support, and this has actually been something that I think is becoming added onto more and more. I wondered if Heather knew anything about that, this teacher support area. I know we're still in beta mode, so we're still being added onto, and I feel like it's getting more things in every time I check it.
I don't actually know, but I'm assuming that, like you are, that they're going to continue to add as we move forward in this area to support teachers. But I don't know for sure from the inside. I don't have the inside scoop.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so here,
Can we just
yeah,
stop?
go ahead.
I feel like they said it was a live document and that this is the basic and they're supposed to be adding examples, and that's why you wouldn't probably want to print it out, because it's going to eventually have links to resources and it's going to be like a super go-to spot, I think. So I think it's going to be useful.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I have found that there are some examples that they're giving. Like right here, it says, for example, 3 granola bars, 3 holes are shared equally with 4 people. So that right there, you have an example that you can think about the context and how that can help you teach.
Yeah,
And some of this
it'd be a fun activity.
Yeah.
In
Mhm.
some of the sections too, they have visuals, which are sometimes really nice to have. So checking out those teacher supports can give you a lot of information, which is
Mhm.
nice.
Mhm. Well, and I think about this part, and I think about this is where it gives us some ideas of what to do with kids, but not always specifically, but also gives us a little bit of education in ourselves about fractions and how we can think about fractions and sort of the basis for fractions, because sometimes we need a little bit of education ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think just looking at that section that you're on right there, where it talks about the different, sometimes those are called the personalities of fractions. So all these different things that fractions can be. And I think in general, speaking for myself, in my educational background, my knowledge was focused on the part whole idea of fractions, and some of these other pieces were not ones that I was as familiar with.
Yeah, for sure. Um, okay, so then now that you have all this stuff to help you that's on the curriculum website, it's time to go and plan. So if we jump out of there, yeah, and go back to slides. So all those things are there to sort of help you plan long term and also short term. Yep, so this is kind of our walkthrough of what we've done. Then we looked at this compare grades option and then the teacher supports.
Did you want to talk about this slide before we proceed, or no?
Yep. So we just think about like what we've gone through so far is what do we need to know ourselves and what do we need our students to know? And then how are we going to do that is really what's going to come up next. And this is what we're going to show is just one example of how we tackled fractions.
Okay. I feel like Derek kind of answered this question for us too when he talked about like looking at the expectations, knowing what they are, doing a diagnostic, and then really like kind of leads you to, you know, what they need to know and what they do know and where they need to go.
For sure.
Okay.
Okay, so this actually was not the learning goal that Derek and I laid out beforehand, but we thought this is how we would create a learning goal between those two expectations and sort of clump them together in language that the kids can understand. So we made this learning goal and then some success criteria, which is, and you can chart this in your room. As you can see there, there's a little chart and it's like a working progress, right? So as you uncover things with your class and how you go to your next steps and some things you feel are important to cover in that chunk of time you have with them on fractions, you can add to this chart. That's why the dots are there.
Mhm.
It's also helpful because when you have a learning goal, it helps you write the report card comment at the end because you have a clear knowledge and direction of where you went.
Mhm.
I also find when I lay out a learning goal, it helps to keep myself focused, to kind
Yeah.
of stay on track to what the goal behind our learning is.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know how quickly things can kind of go in a totally different direction. So really to have that learning goal and to stay focused is really important
Mm-hmm.
to me in my classroom.
Yeah, for sure, Alicia. Great point. And this is not something that you would create ahead of time. Like this is something you would show them the goal and then work on the success criteria as you uncover it with the students. It's not something that you would have like, we're going to do this and this and this. It's as the kids understand that.
If I can jump in here while you're on this slide with respect to the learning goals in math, one of the things I was happy to see in the new curriculum is the acknowledgement that you don't necessarily have to share the learning goal up front, but you can do it at the end of the lesson, because sometimes we want them to discover something and we don't want to kind of give it away before we even get started. And so just, I think in the math curriculum for sure, the acknowledgement that the learning goal can come at the end. And it doesn't have to preempt the lesson. Obviously, as the teacher, you need to know it before the lesson begins, but the students don't necessarily need to know it before. So I was happy to see that written into the curriculum this time around.
Mm-hmm. And I see Pam wrote there in the chat that this becomes the language of the feedback that you give the kids, so that when they're struggling with a concept, this is where they can turn to work on, or you can work on together.
Mhm.
Okay, so now that we have that kind of laid out, we thought, okay, so if you're going to plan some activities, you need some resources, obviously. So we can still use the ones that we have around, like the curriculum is still relevant for all of these resources. And I wondered, like, Derek, if there was any that you would add to this list that you use to help you on a regular basis. Like, I know I have a few favorites too that are definitely not on here.
I just like to use some of the Marion Small books that have like higher level thinking questions, and they're kind of good for your students that are grasping concepts, but they need a little bit of a challenge after. So I had a couple in my room who would do well with giving them something that might be a little bit above what we're working with, but you're keeping them engaged in the material.
Yep, for sure. Absolutely. I enjoy open questions. Absolutely.
I really like the fraction learning pathway. When I focused on fractions one year, like in my class, and I knew that we were struggling with it. And so I went to this resource, and it gave me a better understanding of what I'm trying to do when I'm teaching fractions. And so it was a good resource. And also the guide to effective. I feel like that front part in any of those, the juniors packages, where they have the booklets for each, like this one's for fractions, there'll be one for decimals, and that beginning part is so useful. And it's like usually about 15 pages, and it's so worth the read because it sets your mind up to really understand where you're going and what you're trying to achieve. And then they also have good activities that I find are always appropriate developmentally, like they're not too complex. It's teaching them so that they like it's a better, I find they're a really useful way of understanding like how to teach it. So I really like those.
And actually, the next slide, Sally, has an example of something taken from the guides book. It sounds like you kind of like led us right into that slide, but
Okay, you want to talk about Nelson though for a second, if that's
yeah,
okay.
for sure, for sure.
I know that there's a lot of like bad rap about Nelson math, like the using it or concerns about using, but I feel like there are some good things in Nelson. And I think the biggest struggle was that Nelson, like, people say, okay, this is the order, and so I'm going to teach this first day, teach this the next day, teach that the next day, and not like think about what's my students are showing me, and maybe they need to spend more time on this. And like, so following like the checkoff order with Nelson was a bit of a challenge, I think, that teachers are aware of. But there are good questions in there, and there are some good games in there. So I wouldn't write Nelson off and by any means. And as a newer teacher, Nelson's really valuable to see an order in which you might teach something, right? If you're new to math and like you're not sure, I think that is useful. I go to fraction learning pathways though, and to the guide to effective first.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is totally is true. I don't think that you should get rid of Nelson because it is a resource, but like any resource, I wouldn't lean on one
Yeah.
overly, right? It's good to have a few in your pocket that you can turn to and have pull questions from.
And I feel like the guide really, like, so this is the guide that we're talking about. And
Mm-hmm.
when
Mm-hmm.
you read that first section,
Mm-hmm.
it really sets you up to like think about what am I trying to have my students achieve, and like
Mm-hmm.
what am I looking for? And so then you can be more responsive to your
Mm-hmm.
students and what
And
they're.
also exposing them to the things they need to be exposed to, right? If I think a lot, I think probably in some of my years, I would only use an area model to show them and not think about or know about the set or linear models that are also out there, and they need to know that. So some really good info in there for sure.
Can I just speak to this slide really quickly? Because I'm noticing that too. Like the area model was really where we grounded our learning after a while. And you kind of plan different activities. And the linear model, I think, I did introduce that, but I think not knowing where the fraction knowledge was before, I think it's important to focus on the area model first, because that's where you're going to solidify some understanding. And then you might move to the linear model after.
Yeah, and Kate talked yesterday about when we were prepping for this, Kate was talking about context too.
Mhm.
Kate, do you want
That's taking me back too far. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think like it's helpful for kids to to have a story behind their fractions, because fractions are always attached, like any number, they're attached to something. And helping them with that fraction. Like I was actually working in a fraction classroom today, and we were starting a linear model with them, and we had to sort of think about it like a race, right? And if we were doing equivalent fractions, and if you're at a race and you take all these water breaks, and this person took water breaks, and but that was really helpful for them. And I even drew a man at the front, right, just so that they can think about starting at 0 and moving to the whole. So the context is very helpful, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think too, if we're looking at that progression of where students are coming from with the idea of fractions, we are very familiar with that area model, and kids make sense of that. When we think about sharing, you know, a pizza amongst 6 people or giving someone half of something, they think about items like cookies or, you know, chocolate bars and things like that. So it just goes back to that whole, when you're planning, thinking kind of about what you know your students do know and using those as those building blocks to help kind of move them to more sophisticated or a different way of thinking about things.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
For sure.
Okay.
Okay, so this is where Derek and I came in, and when I got to Derek, we decided he was doing fractions, and so we did do some kind of diagnostic stuff on day 1 with Cuisenaire rods, which I thought were great, actually. And then we decided to switch to fraction pieces, which is totally fine. And fraction pieces are something nice because they're in every school on our board. So this is something that you can find. So we thought that was a great show too. They're nice because the whole is constant, which is the black piece here, and that concrete tools help to build conceptual understanding. When something is new, it's good to use a tool. I heard Pam Gallant say that one time, and I think that's so true. And it helps them have that visual representation to hang on to when they're thinking back to when they're thinking about working with fractions. Okay, so Derek, do you want to share sort of how the week went a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, day 1 was kind of an open diagnostic, and even like the Cuisenaire rods didn't I didn't get where I needed to go, I think, with them. So we wanted to kind of switch a tool to something. And I think that went back to understanding that the curriculum has changed a bit and students haven't been exposed to fractions maybe as often as other students. So allowing yourself to kind of plan a few steps back to solidify understanding before you move forward. And so when we brought out the fraction pieces, they were able to assign values after the black piece was the whole. And that's really where understanding if they knew vocabulary came in too. So were they calling the pieces by color? Were they calling the pieces by their actual fraction value? And we kind of used that day to hammer out vocabulary so that when we moved into other things, there was a little bit more of a refresher or more understanding that might not have been there before.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like our goal was to work on equivalent fractions, but it took us like all week, probably until the Thursday and Friday, to even really start talking about that, because we realized that we had to do a lot of backtracking, and that was okay because we hadn't planned too far ahead. So it was kind of like thinking about where we wanted to go, but making adjustments every day based on what we saw and heard the kids do. So these were just a few clips of some things that we did in the classroom, finding the pieces on the smartboard and having the kids play with them and find equivalent fractions. And then Derek ended one day with this question about, I can't read it, but it says, which one is greater, half or 45 out of 10 or out of 100? And we had some really great discussion that came out of there because we had done so much work with halves.
The other one, the anchor chart that has the 0, half, and whole, we built that, I think, on Wednesday, and that was a big like aha for the students of having that visual so that they could actually compare values with one another. So it's 0, then it's less than half, exactly half, more than half, and then a whole. And then having that chart up and comparing it to the anchor chart beside it, like I would take students on like field trips to the anchor charts, because I think students needed a little bit of a refresher to use the tools in the room, that it's okay to move around, it's okay to go check. And they did that after a while, and I think that was helpful for when they went back to do the task.
Mm-hmm. And like when we were doing this, Derek made a really pretty anchor chart, but like when I was doing this on the smartboard, it was like super messy. But as we were filling it out, the kids, we started like choral counting, right? It was like, well, if this is 1/8, what's next? And it was like 2/8, 3/8, 4, and they just could choral count. And then they were choral counting. And I think we didn't go further than 12ths because their expectation didn't need to go further than 12ths, but we could have, and they would have understood it. So that was kind of a neat connection moment for them, I thought too. I put this little picture in the corner, and that was actually something that I stumbled upon today that I thought was helpful. I wanted to show you, Derek. This was a tool, you can't quite see it here, but this was a tool that I found on Math Playground, and it's called Math Fraction Bars. And the kids can move, there's 5 bars that they can compare, and they can move the bars to find equivalent fractions. So I thought that was really neat. That they could do on their own if you didn't have these manipulatives to help you. So I wanted to add that piece in there. Yeah, it was really great. And I will say, like, our goal was to get to equivalent fractions. And Derek, did we actually get there?
I think we developed a big understanding of, yeah, I think we got there in a sense that from what we uncovered early on to where we went, like by Friday, we were like, they've made so many gains, even in just using appropriate vocabulary, you know?
Yeah, we definitely did not cover equivalent fractions in 1 week. There was lots of stuff to still do, but you're right, there was so much good learning.
And the other piece that I wanted to bring up, and I think for junior teachers, is that we're kind of doing things in maybe 2-week intervals now, maybe 3-week with the new long range plans. And so I'm excited because we can come back to this in the new year, and then we can come back to this again in term 2. We're not saying that we're just focusing on this in term 1, but you're kind of going back into different concepts as you kind of add layers or meet new expectations.
Yeah, just I guess it depends on which long range plan somebody is using, but are you referring to the ministry long range plans, Derek?
Yeah.
So that it does cycle back. Yeah. I just have to say that I feel like you, with your anchor chart alone, you've made many connections to equivalent fractions. If I look at half and I follow it all the way down, I can see all those equivalent fractions, and I'm sure all that groundwork before is going to help those equivalent fractions really move smoothly for your students later.
And we were trying to make it on Google Docs to make it like perfectly aligned, but we couldn't quite get there. So if anybody is like tech savvy, that would be a good thing to kind of laminate and then have in the room as well.
I like how Kate noted that she did it messy first and developed it with the students, and then you made the fancy one after. Because developing with the students is really critical. So I like that you
yeah, on the chart, it was we just had the middle half line that you were just talking about there, and then it just filled in after that, which was great.
I like the idea of the choral counting up by the unit fractions. That's something that I think even, our primary students, it comes out earlier in the curriculum, that adding of those unit fractions, which is basically what you're doing when you're counting up. Next time when you cycle back to it, I would be interested to see if you go up and over the whole, because that's the piece of fractional understanding that tends to, sometimes students are confused by it if you go past 1, like, is that even allowed?
Yeah.
Partially because of the name of it, we call that an improper fraction, like it's illegal or something. And so that doesn't help our students feel comfortable with it, but that choral counting, it can really help them to go up and over the whole too.
Yeah.
Did you do that as well? Or?
I did get to mixed numbers and improper fractions a week and a half after Kate was there, and we did go back to that chart, and it was a good kind of like writing just after it, right? Like putting a new page after, and then saying, okay, this is a whole, so what comes after that? And then we used the pattern blocks to kind of look at what mixed numbers and improper fractions would look like.
Lots of
I
great tools there.
Example of that here for the next page. It tied in perfectly there, Heather. So this, I was in Lara Saznov's class last week, and they were working on fractions, and so we did a choral count with fractions, and you can see how we went back and reflected. We started off with 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, and as I was recording and the students were counting it with me, Lara was coloring in each section. So then they had a visual connected to the growing, the count that's occurring. And so we would stop at, say, 6/10 and like, who can tell us what the next is going to be? And then we'd continue on, and we were at 10/10 and somebody shouted out, it's a whole. And I was like, okay, so what's going to be next? And there was a lot of discussion on that. We went with 11/10, and then we continued on, and then we stopped later. Like we'd stop here and then make somebody give what they thought the next three numbers were going to be. And then once we got down here, we went back and went over and talked about, well, when we're at 11/10, what did it look like? And now how else could we name that? And then they talked about 1 whole and then 1/10. So it was making that connection between the improper, the whole, and the mixed number.
Okay, so then we thought that's a great activity. Sally, I'm totally going to use that.
I was going to say the same thing. I was like, why didn't I think of that?
I know.
To have the visual.
Yeah.
The visual with the count, right?
Yeah. And actually, I know on the Simcoe County plans for the first 20 days, when I was in classrooms in that first little bit, choral counting was a huge part of what they included in that first 20 days on a daily basis. So that was kind of nice. I have to mute myself. There's students all around me.
I was going to say,
another room. They're in another room with the door closed, but
I couldn't hear them.
I was going to say too, Derek, it would be cool with that last slide, if you look at it, you can redo the same activity with decimals, of course, and make all the beautiful connections there.
Yeah. And I want to put a plug in for that fraction learning pathway that was shown on that resource page, because that's where I learned about the value of counting unit fractions. And so they can make the connection and understand. And it really supports if you have a number line and then you start adding fractions and you get to, say, 12/10. If I add 3 more tenths, what am I going to be? So 12/10 plus 3/10 is going to be 15/10. So helping make those connections. There's so much that you can do with this. Heather, I had a question for you before we go on to the last slide. Were there any other resources, fractional resources that because we didn't get to hear from you on that slide, and I wondered if you had some that you could suggest for us.
My biggest resource for fractions is the knowledge of the different multiplicative problem types. So we did a session last year at around this time, I think, and we looked at multiplication, quotative division, and partitive division with whole numbers. And it's really important when we're teaching fractions to know those distinctions and know how to use them with fractions. So where we would start with partitive division problems, like that granola bar problem that was kind of pointed out in the curriculum, and then moving to multiplication and quotative division, specific kinds of types of those problems. The new curriculum is written on a foundation of some great research that's been done around using those types of problems to help students learn and understand fractions. And so, the other thing I would like to point out about the curriculum, and because you picked the fractions expectations to look at, is, the curriculum hopefully is designed, the new one, with more knowledge about how students learn and develop mathematics. And so the expectations, although they may seem, it's not perfect, and so sometimes it may seem that an expectation comes out of the blue and we're not sure why it's there. But as we learn more about where the research where the curriculum came from, we will learn ways to help support it. And so sometimes we have to then dig into, and you guys alluded to this, our own knowledge, our own content knowledge, our own pedagogical knowledge of how to teach something, which might be different from what we experienced. And so it's really interesting to hear you folks like talk about that.
Nice. Looking forward to more learning with you. Okay, Kate, or maybe I feel like Kate was going to speak here.
Yeah, I can. I'm interested in that partitive and quotative stuff more. I want to dig into that, but I know we're on a little time constraint. So we thought, what's the big takeaway from this after school session? And we thought it's a new curriculum, but lots of things are the same. So don't totally revamp your whole program, continue on the same path, but making sure that you're checking to see that what you're teaching is in line with the new curriculum, and that you are teaching things that might be different from what you're doing, but that are working towards those expectations. And then just taking some time to explore and use the new digital platform yourself. Like I remember when it came out in the summer and I was like, I don't enjoy this. It was terrible. I was kind of like clicking a lot and not really sure, but actually I feel better about how to explore it because I've had so much time to use it and dig in. So definitely use that and all the features that's available. And don't forget to check out that key changes document and maybe print that off. And also the one that Derek was holding up, which you're able to print off too, right? That grade 1 to 8 comparison. And you can do that for every strand. So that could be your curriculum that you print off and refer to, because it looks like, Derek, you find that super helpful. And this last point, just know the expectations for your grade and work towards them. So you got to figure out where your kids are at, that diagnostic piece that Sally and Derek were talking about, and then working towards your grade level and where your kids should be at.
I think
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Derek.
I was just gonna say, like, if we were to add something to this slide, I think connecting with your prior grade partners and ones that are after you, because we could have some great conversations about what might have been missed a year before because there are so many different changes across all strands. You can kind of collaborate with your peers about, hey, this is what I was able to get to, and then move from there. And I think out at my school, we have a good team here where we're kind of looking and seeing what are you doing in your classroom, and then okay, when they get to the next person, they will have some of those foundational pieces already there in a similar way, in a similar strategy, right? Don't overhaul anything you're doing, but connect with the teacher that's going to be getting your kids the next year.
Good point.
Great point.
Thanks, Derek. That's super valuable.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's, yeah. So thanks everybody for coming. We hope that gave you a little overview of the curriculum and how to navigate through that and some examples. There's definitely takeaways. Even though I ran the show here with Derek in his classroom about fractions, there was more that I took away. So there's always something great to be had. And here's our emails if you'd like to know anything more about that. I certainly will be chatting with Heather about those different problem types and fractions. And thanks so much, Derek, for coming and sharing our experience together. It's really great to hear from like a classroom teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Hey, have a good night.
Yeah.